Hello and welcome to this week's episode of That's Good, Pick It Up, a podcast mostly about golf books. I'm your host, Nate Oxman, and you're listening to one of 5 podcasts within the BestBall Golf Club, a growing online golf community that I'd highly recommend you check out by visiting bestball.com. You can also find BestBall on Instagram and YouTube at Golf Best Ball. Thanks to the great Robbie Woodard for all he does, producing this podcast and running the BestBall Golf Command Post. Let's get right to this week's episode, which features part 2 of my interview with Larry Baush, who wrote an unbelievable, well-researched biography of Tony Lema called Uncorked. Baush's Lema stories are fabulous, so let's get back to the interview. Here's Larry Baush and his book Uncorked, The Life and Times of Champagne Tony Lema. That's good. Pick it up.
But years later, when Bob Rosberg was doing working on the broadcast crew at a golf tournament, he was always the roving reporter, and his trademark saying was, "He's got no chance," when he'd walk up and find a ball in the rough or behind a tree. Anyway, a couple of guys came up to, or no, a guy came up to him around the clubhouse and said, hey, they started talking. He goes, "Hey, do you remember that tournament in Orange County where you and Tony Lema were in a playoff?" And Rosberg went, "Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday." And he said, "Well, you know that ball on that first playoff hole was out of bounds, and we kicked it back inbounds. Me and my buddies, we were there. They were actually there in uniform from the nearby Army base." Or no, Marine base, excuse me, and said Tony was a Marine, and we always look out for each other. So they kicked the ball in bounds, and Rosberg had quite a sharp retort to fans often, and he came right back with the story about how Tony had said that he was going to take a club job if he didn't win, and he said, "So if you guys hadn't kicked that ball in, Tony would probably still be alive."
Yeah, I couldn't believe that when I read that.
That's Rosberg right there.
Yeah, that was a really cool story. And that kind of propelled Lema to keep his game growing, right? And I loved listening or reading the stories about his first Masters. He recognized what a privilege it was to be able to play at Augusta. Um, and I think from what I remember, if I remember correctly, he um, was with Byron Nelson before the Masters started, and Nelson told him, like, "Your swing looks perfect. I don't think there's, anything that you need to adjust." And that kind of fueled him to play great golf, right?
Yeah. There's 2 things. You said that it kind of that win in Orange County kind of propelled him on. He actually won the next week.
Oh, wow.
And there was a point system for the fall tour that year, and the leader or the winner of that points system would earn an invitation to the Masters. So that's how he got to the Masters in 1963. And just like every player in the Masters, he fell in love the moment he drove up Magnolia Lane, with the course, with the surroundings, the clubhouse. And it's a magical place once you're on the grounds. Even on TV, it's a magical place. But
Yeah.
once you're on the grounds, it's just something special. And he played a practice round with Venturi and Byron Nelson. And after the practice round, Venturi says, excuse me, uh, Lema says, "So, what do you think, Mr. Nelson?" And that's when Mr. Nelson said, "I can't see one thing wrong with your swing. You're swinging beautiful." And it was just the confidence builder that Tony needed to go out and play. Um, just super. As a rookie, he was in contention. I mean, that's even stating it lightly. He was sitting in the Butler cabin waiting for Nicklaus to finish to see if he won, Nicklaus won, or if they would end up tied. Um, and he would have been the first winner of the Masters in their first attempt since Gene Sarazen. So it was amazing how well he played. You watch the 1963 highlight film, and you see what a difficult Masters it was weather-wise. There was a lot of rain, especially in the second round. Um, and you see the putt that he makes on the 18th green from back then. The Sunday pin was a little bit different than the Sunday pin is now. Not a whole lot different, but a little bit different on the same level, but it's a little more to the golfer's right. Say come up onto the green. Well, he was back right, so he had to come down the hill. Putt broke a lot, and he made it. And then there's on the highlight film, there's great footage of him as he's walking along the edge of the green, watching the ball as it's rolling towards the hole, and then it goes in the hole, and he dances a little jig. He's he's then taken to the Butler cabin where he's sitting there with Arnold Palmer, the defending champion, and Bobby Jones and Cliff Roberts,
Yep.
and they're watching the action on television. Well, Nicklaus comes up and he hits his approach shot at 18. That's in a similar spot to where Tony's putt that he made was. So he had to come down the same hill, had the same break, and he runs it about 3 feet by and makes the putt coming back to defeat Tony by 1. Nicklaus later told the press that he couldn't believe he didn't make that first putt coming down the hill, and he also couldn't believe that he made the 3-footer coming back because it wasn't a very easy putt either. When we interviewed Nicklaus for the documentary movie, that was one thing that he brought up right away. Was he said Tony should have won that 1963 Masters. So it's just amazing performance for a first timer at Augusta, and it's really a cool story.
Yeah, yeah. And Nicholas had, I think if I remember correctly, Nicholas had to par 17 and 18 to win, right? And he did.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
And then there was a quote, from Tony when he was watching, I think, in Clifford Roberts' private office, Nicholas finished and he said, I think I have it made here. I have this great lifestyle now. And then he won again right in Memphis.
Yeah.
Yep. And then he
Yeah.
became one of the favorites to win the US Open that year at the Country Club in Brookline.
He was, and he by this time he and Betty, and again, Betty is the reason that he broke out after he won Orange County, and then got to play in the Masters. They had become engaged between that time, and they were going to get married a little bit later in 1963. But he finished second at the Masters, and he won a little more than $10,000. And at that point, he felt that he was financially at a point financially where they could move the wedding up, and they got married and spent their honeymoon at the Tournament of Champions when it was played in Las Vegas. There's a great picture of Tony carrying Betty over the threshold into the honeymoon suite, and instead of holding a bouquet of flowers, she's holding a bouquet of golf clubs. Head to Brookline to go for the U.S. Open, and Tony wanted to drive her there from New York to show her the scenery of New England. So he arrives late, gets in maybe one practice round. This would kind of be a theme for Tony, by the way. He wasn't real big on practice rounds. But he got into the mix, and he writes quite eloquently, along with Willem Brown, his ghostwriter, about coming down for the last 3 holes at Brookline, which are kind of make a circuit. They kind of turn back on one another, and they play in kind of a loop, and how the crowds were just going insane. He said he felt like a Roman gladiator marching through the streets of Rome to the Colosseum. Is how he and Gwillem phrased that, and he could have won that tournament if he had had just a little bit more major tournament experience. He took a risk on the 16th hole. Yep, the 16th hole. Might have been the 17th. Took a risk where he took a little bit more club. Very windy conditions at Brookline that year. He took a little extra club to try to fade a shot into a tucked pin. The ball didn't fade. It went straight, and he had hit it through the green into a nearly unplayable lie into a bunker, and his hopes were dashed at that point. So, like I say, if he had had a little bit more major tournament experience, he would have known to just hit for the center of the green. And when he left that tournament, he was also totally deflated in bogeys 18. So as
Hmm.
he's leaving the tournament where he missed the playoff by 2 strokes, he's like, it dawns on him that, he was an idiot. He should have been in that
Yeah.
playoff with Palmer, Boros, and Cupid. Should have been a 4-way playoff. So there's 2 major tournaments right back to back where he got the kind of education and experience that would pay off big dividends for him in the next year.
Yeah, yeah. And so that fall or that season, he finished second on the money list behind Nicholas, right? And he played on his first Ryder Cup team at Eastlake, and that started an awesome career in the Ryder Cup, right? His record was really impressive.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think he gets enough attention for how impressive his Ryder Cup career was.
Yeah,
He played in 2 of them, 1 home, 1 away. Palmer was the playing captain on his first team at East Lake. Uh, that Ryder Cup is kind of special because Bobby Jones was still alive and able to watch the proceedings, although he had to be driven around in a cart to watch it because
wow.
his disease had progressed so far. And then Byron Nelson is his captain in England in '65. So, um, and yeah, he was a good partner. He was great in singles.
Hmm.
Uh, and the Ryder Cup really flew under the radar back then. It wasn't much like it is now, with where it's gotten so big that players have difficulty handling their
Yeah.
nerves.
Yeah, I don't think he would have had a problem, handling that pressure early in the, career. And I think in his first Masters, you talked about Tony being nervous, but once he got, the hang of the tour lifestyle and in competition, I don't think that would have bothered him. Do you?
No, but he did say at the first Ryder Cup, he told reporters that uh, at the opening ceremonies when they play the national anthems and raise the flags, that it really, really affected him, and it kind of. I don't know that I would call it nervous, but the weight of the event as far as representing your country, he felt the full weight of that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And that's good though, that's good. Some people like need that feeling to help them perform. And maybe that's what some of the Americans, are lacking, right? The feeling of that pressure.
Yeah, and he also, being a Marine,
Yeah.
he was always super grateful that he was an American, that he was given the opportunities that this country bestowed on him, and which is great because if you look at Tony Lema's life, there were so many ups and downs. I mean, steep up and
Yeah.
downs. Father dying at 3, and then getting on tour and then having the big slump and then
Yeah.
working your way out of the slump. And, so his whole life was up and down quite a bit. Um, so it was kind of cool to see him come through in that moment.
Yeah. So he finished fourth on the money list, another good year in 63, and then 64 was a really special year. If my notes are correct, he won in Westchester and then won, is this back to back weeks? He won the Buick Open after Palmer gave him that putter.
He won, uh, he won 3 events in 5 weeks.
And then this was leading into the US Open at Congressional.
No, this would be 1964 we're talking about now.
Okay.
At the 64 Open, he didn't do that great. I don't recall the details of it right now. But yeah, he wins Westchester, he wins Buick, he wins the Cleveland Open against
Yes.
Palmer in a playoff. By this time, Palmer, before he gets on this hot streak, he and Palmer were playing together in an exhibition. And Tony was in need of a putter because he made an adjustment to his bullseye. Butch Bear told me this story. Made an adjustment to his bullseye putter using the side of his shoe and a swinging action, and the head went flying off and almost hit Butch Baird. So he was in need of a new putter, and Palmer pulled one out of his bag and said, "Here, try this." And Tony fell in love with the putter, and it just led to one of the hottest streaks in the 1960s in a condensed time period. Winning those three events, um, finishes pretty high up at the fourth event, and now it's time to climb on board a plane and fly to St. Andrews.
So he got a putter from Palmer, and then he got Palmer's caddy, right, at St. Andrews.
That's right. Palmer did not play in the 1964 Open, citing exhaustion and business commitments. And he and Tony was back then. I think there were only 7 Americans that went to the 1964 British Open,
Okay.
and Tony was waffling back and forth because it was impossible to earn enough money on the trip to pay for the trip. That's
Yeah.
how little the Open actually paid in prize money. In fact, Tony in subsequent years would go back early and play exhibitions with Peter Allis as a way to kind of pay for the trip. But uh, Palmer talked Tony into going because Tony was going, I don't know if I'm going to go. I'm going to go. I'm not going to go. And I think part of it was he didn't want to leave Betty at home alone because they couldn't afford to fly both of them there.
Hmm.
And part of the attraction of going was that he was going to be able to leave Betty at home and be a single man. so, so he and his business manager, Fred Corcoran, who was another one of these father figures that Tony was always looking for and finding. But Fred Corcoran was Ted Williams' business manager.
Hmm.
He was Sam Snead's business manager. He was the manager of the LPGA Tour when it was founded. He was just this sports agent impresario, and he went with Tony to uh, Scotland for the Open Championship. And on the long transatlantic plane flight, he's telling Tony all about the old course and saying how much how different a kind of style of golf you have to play at St. Andrews and you play on a normal course. Tony finally got fed up with it and said, okay, listen, I'm just going to go out there and play the course and see what happens. Well, they arrive late.
Yeah.
He doesn't get doesn't even get a chance to play a full practice round at St. Andrews. So his saving grace that week was Palmer's caddy, Tip Anderson, one of the most well-known caddies
Hmm.
in the world, but especially at St. Andrews, where he knew it like the back of his hand. Um, and so Tony just did whatever Tip told him to. He says, "Aim for that church spire and hit it with a little draw." Tony would do that. Um, Tony learned early in his he went out for, he got in maybe 9 holes of a practice round, and he learned early that the wedge shouldn't come out of the bag but rather you should go with a 7 or 8 iron, chip and run shot. And there's beautiful footage of him coming up at the final green, and he's got like a 3 or 4 stroke lead and plays a 150-yard chip and run up through the Valley of Sin, and right next to the hole for a tap in easy win. So he becomes a major championship, and I firmly believe that the two things that allowed him to win the Open Championship was, one, his ability to let Tip O'Neill steer him around the course, and or excuse me, Tip Anderson,
Yeah.
uh, direct him around the course, and the other is the major tournament experience that he got the year prior at both the Masters and the Open. And the Scots just fell in love with him. He had a huge crowd, and all the fans loved him. And the champagne party after he won the claret jug lasted long into the night. In fact, it moved the next night into France, where they went and visited the ex-king of England at his apartment. Um, King Edward, I think it was, that fell in love with the American woman and gave up the throne, and spent the afternoon talking with him and drinking champagne. And so Tony could It's pretty interesting if you consider from where he came from, near poverty, where his mom had to work 2 jobs just to put food on the table, how Tony could hobnob with some of the most important people in the sports world.
Yeah, that win at St. Andrews must have been huge for his. It was huge for his kind of career off the course, right? He got tons of endorsements. Was appeared on Ed Sullivan and did an interview with Howard Cosell. Had Tony Lema golf balls and was on Shell's Wonderful World of Golf. Did that help him a ton financially?
Yes, a couple things. So Fred Corcoran, as his agent, was so good at promoting his players. If you look through golf magazines and Golf Digest magazines from the end of 1962 through the middle of 1966, there's just this steady climb of Tony Lema advertisements, and it gets to a point where he's got the double spread in a golf magazine ad for jockey clothing. And the other thing that Fred Corcoran did is it helped him get out of the sponsorship deal that he had with Malarkey. So Malarkey was his sponsor all the way up into 1964, and Tony was green behind the ears. So this relationship with his sponsor, Malarkey, started on a handshake. Then after the good first year, they signed a contract, and Malarkey actually said, "You don't have to pay me back any money if you just quit after, at the end of at the latter end of the 2-year slump that he was in." And Tony didn't want to quit, but he had dug himself a hole because he didn't really read the contract, didn't understand the business, didn't take it to a lawyer. And so he was on the spot to pay back Malarkey from his winnings, and if he couldn't pay him back from the winnings, he still owed him the money. So Tony was playing in 62 and 63 and the start of 64, and he was still splitting his on and off course earnings with Malarkey. Well, Corcoran helped Tony with the legal help that he needed to get out of the deal, but it cost Tony dearly. He wrote that in by the time he was going to the British Open, he was starting over pretty much from scratch. So winning that tournament, and this is kind of like Tony and how he was as a teenager and playing in money matches with Lucius Bateman. He would he would gamble more than he had in his pocket. It was kind of like what Lee Trevino said. He learned pressure by playing a $20 bet when he only had $5 in his pocket.
That'll do it for part 2 of my conversation with Larry Baush and his book, Uncorked, The Life and Times of Champagne Tony Lema. You can purchase this book by going to Amazon and searching Larry Baush, B-A-U-S-H, or by visiting tourbackspin.com. Larry operates an awesome golf history website at tourbackspin.com, so if you like the history of professional golf, I'd highly recommend you visit his site and subscribe to his newsletter, which is also available on Substack. Just go to Substack and search his name, Larry Baush. That's Baush, B-A-U-S-H. Here's a reminder that you can find my book, The Philly Phenoms, a middle-grade sports fiction novel, on Amazon as well. Just go to Amazon and search my name, Nate Oxman, O-X-M-A-N, or The Philly Phenoms. The book was released back in June and has won a handful of national awards. The story follows the journey of Lee Lomax as he falls in love with the game of golf and begins his golf journey. You can visit thephillyphenoms.com to learn more. You can also follow me on Instagram at Nate Oxman. And if you're employed at a golf facility or you're a member of one and think your club's junior program would enjoy a golf book workshop, please feel free to send me a message. I ran workshops and other events at a handful of golf clubs here in the Philly area last year, and they were really well received. I'm more than happy to travel far and wide to help use my book, The Philly Phenoms, to introduce this great game to as many young people as possible. Please take the time to share this podcast with as many as you can. download, rate, review, subscribe, do all of those things all podcast hosts ask you to do. And come back next week for a part 3 of our conversation with Larry Baush and his book, Uncorked, The Life and Times of Champagne Tony Lema. That's good. Pick it up.